tuning into the seed webinar. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the California Small Farm Conference. We're excited to have you here. If you're looking for the making the most of your seed investment, you are in the right place. We're going to be talking about seeds for the next hour and 15 minutes, which is always an exciting topic. So thanks, everybody, for being here. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance for Family Farmers, and I just want to give a big thanks to our presenter today, Sara from Mowing Seeds. And of course, to all our sponsors and conference organizers who helped make this event possible. Letting everybody know that today's session is being recorded and it's going to be an evaluation that pops up at the end of the workshop. And really encourage everybody to use that chat feature. We'll hear a little bit more about how to interact. This will be an interactive workshop. So Sara there will explain how that all works. But we have a lot to cover, in-depth topic here, so we're going to pass it over to Sara. And Sara, why don't you take it from here?
Great. Hi, everybody. Suddenly I can't see myself, which is always a little strange. I've gotten used to being able to see myself, but can you all see me? I'm still seeing the CAFF logo.
I can see you.
Okay, awesome. I will share my screen to start and kind of orient ourselves. Right. How's that?
Looks great.
Okay. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. As Evan said, I'm Sara, and I am the commercial grower rep for Mowing Seeds. I cover California as well as the Southwest, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii. And been here doing this thing for about 2.5 years. So I've thankfully gotten to know a lot of California growers, even if sometimes it's over the phone because of the pandemic. It's been a lovely 2.5 years of working with growers specifically around seeds. And today we're going to talk about making the most of your seed investment. And that really is going to encompass how to be good stewards of the seed that we're using as a key resource on our farms, in our gardens, in our communities. And yeah, how to best care for that resource collectively. Before we start, some key pieces of housekeeping. If you could all mute yourselves, that would. Are we good now?
You're good.
Okay, cool. So yes, if you all could keep yourselves muted, that would be great. Although in the second half of the session, I would love to hear from you all and really have a collective conversation as much as possible. So we can do that in 2 ways. As I'm going through the kind of me talking part of the session more, if you all can type any questions that come up for you in the chat, then Evan can look through them. And when we move into Q&A time, we can move through those questions. And perhaps even preferably for me, I would love to, hear you all and see you all as much as possible. So if you would like to say your question or comment out loud to me in the group, then you could type stack into the chat box. And then Evan can just say, you who want to talk and wrote chat or stack in there, you're up, and then you can unmute yourself and talk to the group. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. Type any questions about how that works into the chat. And with that, I will start. if it will let me. There we go. Okay, so before I kind of get into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to ground us as a group in some history. This is by no means a comprehensive history of seed, but a little bit of historical context for how we got to where we are today and how we might understand where we are today. Yeah, definitely a complicated history, but as I'm sure most of us understand, throughout most of human and plant history, communities have produced the seed that they needed and that worked well in their climatic conditions and growing conditions, and exchange that seed on a much more local and regional level than we do nowadays for the most part. But commercial seed companies really didn't start to form until the second half of the 19th century in the way that we know them today. And then post-World War II, with many other changes across many industries, specialization really ramped up within the seed world, both in breeding as well as production. Those two realms became more commercialized and more specialized. And with that came the adoption of creation of many more first generation F1 hybrids, which made on-farm seed saving harder and effectively commoditized what was otherwise throughout history a commonly held resource, seeds and plant genetics. And from the 70s, or sorry, from the 40s, you know, from after World War II through to the 70s, more small scale companies than we know today, kind of regional companies, really flourished within that context. And then by the 70s, along with, like I said, changes throughout many other industries, a lot more vertical integration started to happen. So companies that were selling other agricultural inputs started to see the value of incorporating seed into their lineup of products and started kind of gobbling up some of those smaller regional companies that had been established in the decades prior. And in part because of that, as well as other forces of consolidation, by the 80s and continuing through to today, a lot of vegetable and plant breeding was concentrated in centers of industrial agriculture. I am talking to you today from Davis, California, home of the Patwin people and current host to the University of California, Davis, where a lot of, it's definitely a center of industrial agriculture and plant breeding. And really, since the 80s, consolidation has been a huge force in the seed industry. There's really kind of a Pac-Man effect that happens with buyouts and mergers happening continuously. And that is a tough reality when it comes to talking about seed sovereignty and preserving seeds and plant genetics as a commonly held resource. And so given that whole context, I'm sure many of you have become aware of this reality. And over the past few decades, the organic and sustainable farming community realized the importance of both breeding varieties specifically for organic and agroecological systems rather than industrial conventional systems, as well as reestablishing and supporting regional seed networks. And that's the place from which Mowing was born in the late 90s. We're based in Vermont, and we were absolutely started with those two principles in mind of really seeing the importance of organic seed for organic systems, as well as the importance of regional seed networks and supporting them in meaningful ways. And I'll just say, for us, the reason that we are really focused on organic seed for two main reasons. One being the environmental impact of seed production. As you might imagine, seed production has the potential to require even more inputs of pesticides, fungicides than food crops do. And so the thought was and still is that the more seed production land, global seed production land that can be transitioned to organic, the better, and that there's a huge potential for environmental impact there. And then also the importance of organic varieties and organic seed for organic systems, basically varieties that have robust genetics that will perform well without so many inputs as a conventional system, without continuous nitrogen input, without the support of fungicides and pesticides, but really that have that resilience built into the genetics of the variety itself. So that's kind of the place that I'm speaking from now throughout this presentation. The goals that I have for this presentation, and I hope they align with why some of you all are here, are to discuss methods for successful propagation, both in the greenhouse of transplants as well as direct seeded crops. It will by no means be a comprehensive, how to grow food crops kind of presentation, that we can touch on some challenges that you all might have and that I hear from growers, and definitely in the latter half of the session, I hope to hear from you all about what you've been trying out and having success with on your farms and in your gardens. And a second goal that I have is to strengthen the relationships between seed companies and growers to address some of those challenges around sustainable organic production, especially. And to do that, I think it's helpful to talk about what seed companies do, what we do, especially specifically to ensure that you all are getting the best possible seed and like setting you up for success in every way that we can. And then what you all do and can do to ensure your own success with the seeds that you're sourcing and maybe even the seeds that you're saving and growing yourselves. And I'm going to focus specifically in the latter half of the talk on 3 crops that I hear about the most from growers, just with challenges that they're having with growing them successfully, and especially with germinating them successfully and getting really nice stands or getting really nice germination in trays in the greenhouse. So those are lettuce, carrots, and beets that we'll focus on, but definitely I welcome any questions about any crops that you might have related to seeds and germination. So like I said, I think it's helpful to talk about what seed companies do a lot of times behind the scenes to ensure that you all are getting the best seed possible. It's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and I think it can be illuminating. This is kind of a funny slide. It's a long list and covers a lot, but I'll just highlight some things in particular. And so kind of starting from the very beginning of where our seed comes from, these first 2 bullets represent really the 2 main channels by which Mowing gets seed and many other of the seed companies that I'm guessing you might work with. Johnny's, Osborne, Territorial, a lot of them, a lot of us function similarly, and it's kind of this mid-sized seed company. And we get about half of our seeds that we sell from that second bullet from vendors, which is other seed companies, oftentimes larger seed companies than us, but not always. And so one of the ongoing efforts that goes into that for us is just building and cultivating those relationships with vendors. There's definitely, it's a kind of iterative process and conversation where we're trialing varieties on our trials farm, telling them what we love, what we don't love about those varieties. They're continuing their in-house breeding, and there's really a back and forth exchange. And Mowing in particular is in a position to advocate, especially for organic growers' needs, because most of our vendors are not, actually, probably all of our vendors are not exclusively selling organic seed. They're also working in conventional seed. And so we have a role of kind of advancing the needs of organic commercial growers and organic gardeners with those larger seed companies. And then another portion of our seed comes directly from growers that we contract productions with. And in those relationships, there are really one-on-one relationships that our contracts manager has. And she's doing a lot of ongoing mentorship, because some of those growers are really seasoned seed growers who have been doing it for decades, and we learn from them. And others are really new to seed growing. And so a relationship there. To ensure success wherever we can in their contract crops. And then once we bring that seed in from either directly from growers or vendors, we, if it's directly from a grower, we'll take a sample lot, and we will often have to also do seed cleaning. The two photos up top there are some seed cleaning efforts in process. A lot of times the growers that we work with don't have the equipment needed to clean the seed fully. That's a bit of a bottleneck often with seed production, in that, you know, it doesn't make sense for every grower to have a mill or to have a density sorter, all these different pieces of equipment. So there will often be a lot of work on our end to clean that seed. And then we'll run testing on it, germination tests, any traces of disease, hybridity, and we also do GMO testing on crops that are particularly susceptible to GMO contamination. And then a big part of what we do is just store the seed really well in a climate controlled facility and make sure that we are stewarding often multi-year supplies of certain varieties as best we can, so that growers can, buy it off the shelf from us and know that it's been stored in prime conditions. And then I'll just skip down to the trialing and grow outs piece. It's kind of a quiet bullet in there, but it's a huge part of what we do, which is both trialing varieties on our farm that haven't been released yet, working with university breeders at other seed companies, like I said, in that iterative process to identify varieties that we are really excited about, that we love, or ones that seem like they need some more work. And a lot of that kind of research effort. And then we also do grow outs of open pollinated varieties to make sure that they are still what everyone thinks and hopes they are, and that the genetics haven't strayed too much over time. So, and we do that especially if we hear reports of some off types from growers. So definitely if you see off types in open pollinated varieties, it's always great to let your seed company know, so that if there's a pattern, we can see it and do some grow outs. And that's all I'll talk about from this slide. That's some of what goes into the back end of seed production. This is kind of just a slide that it was hopefully empowering to you all to know that you can communicate with your seed companies and with your seed reps, and you can kind of get more information than you might be able to get from the catalog or the website. And this is an example of there being multiple lots of a given variety. And you all are welcome to lot shop, where you can say, hey, the sunflower shoots that I used last fall worked awesome for me. I would love to get that same lot rather than whatever new lot you might be working with. And we are always happy to do that, as long as we still have seed left from that old lot, or vice versa. If you really hated the seed that you got last year, it just didn't work for you and your systems for whatever reason, you can definitely talk to your seed rep about getting a different lot. It's not always the case that we have multiple lots, but it sometimes is. And there are many other things like that you can kind of, through direct contact with your reps at different companies, kind of know more clearly what seed you're getting, and be empowered to have control over that. So now I will step into what some recommendations for what you all can do to ensure that you have the best success as possible with your seeds, and that you can be good stewards of seeds. As part of this is also all in the name of, we've seen such volatility in seed supply in the last 2 years. And so I think it's particularly pertinent to talk and think about what we can all do to, to steward seed well. So the first thing is to be in contact with your seed reps. And I think that helps one also be in touch with what's happening in your farm or your garden. If you're kind of reporting to someone what you're seeing, then I think it helps you see it a little bit better. So let us know, and let us know as soon as possible if you're having issues with germination or anything else like that. It really helps everyone if that happens. And Then the second bullet I'll talk about is seed receiving procedures. And I think it can be an easy thing to miss. I certainly was not great at it when I was farming full time. I think you can kind of develop a system for yourself of when your seed gets to you in the mail right away, checking through it, making sure that everything on the pick list matches what's in the box, that there's nothing awry there. And then also writing down in your crop plan or whatever, Excel sheet that you're using for keeping track of things, you can write the lot numbers down for each variety that you get, which really helps with traceability if issues come up later on in the season. And then make sure that you are storing them well. And I think it's easier to think about long-term seed storage and have that dialed in and yeah, prime conditions for storing seed. You can have it in a cool closet or even a refrigerator if you're at a smaller scale. But short-term storage is where I've seen myself mess up, and I hear from other growers there might be loopholes in their short-term storage, and that's really like on a daily basis what you're doing with your seed, especially during springtime or when you're planting seed the most. And it can be easy to take a bundle of seed out to the greenhouse for the day and then do your seeding and leave it there as you move to lunch or you move on to afternoon activities. And that even a few hours in too high of temperatures can really do a lot of damage to seed. So I think having like a kind of even just a Tupperware that's like a shuttle that you move back and forth, and as soon as you're done seeding, you move it back into your long-term storage, can be really helpful. And just being aware and keeping your crew aware of short-term seed storage is a place where I know I've always had a lot of room for improvement. And then propagation systems, it's a huge umbrella in which a lot could be said, and I think I'm going to mostly skip over it, and we can hear examples maybe when we all talk together of the different seeders that folks are working with and how they're making them work for them as best as possible. But just some more conceptual things, I think staying really aware of what's happening in your greenhouse, patterns that you might be seeing in terms of germination throughout the greenhouse or the field. And again, I think being in conversation with someone like a seed rep or an extension agent can hone those skills of daily observation. And if you can, develop a good note-taking system so that you can, again, notice patterns and report them. Moving along, I'll move into some specific transplant issues and techniques for mitigating them. Oh, this is some seed storage examples. So that's just my coworker's long-term seed storage in his nice, cool, north-facing closet, and then the short-term seed storage on the right with a field notebook. So yeah, that's a good example of kind of just one Tupperware that's your shuttle back and forth to long-term storage every day. This is more just thinking about your whole seed system, and really, I think it can be easy to think of seeds just as, a small input in your whole farm system. But if you can really think about a whole seed system on your farm, I think it can really help you both, make the most of your seed investment, not be losing seed to getting too hot or getting wet or whatever. It can also really support your ability to evaluate at the end of the season what varieties did well for you. And if you have all of that lot information recorded, you can take good end of the season notes and really build year to year records for yourself of what's been happening on your farm or in your garden. And these are all other components that you can kind of, I'm not going to talk too specifically about any of them right now. Here are some examples of getting into a little bit of what I hear a lot about from growers who are, having challenges and wondering what to do about them. And one solution, one simple solution, if you have the right setup, can be to just reseed if you're seeing spotty germination after the first few days of emergence. So in this tray of lettuce, there were some that emerged earlier, and then those younger plants were just reseeded. And if you're doing things for a plant sale, like this picture is a 6-pack intended for a plant sale, and there's big enough cells, then you can just go ahead and reseed, and the plants aren't going to outcompete each other. But if you're growing in anything really smaller than like a 72, if you're in a 128 or smaller, you really should just seed whole new flats, because if you try to reseed into a smaller cell, then the older plants are going to overshadow and outcompete the smaller plants. They just don't have enough space on center in between them. Here are other variables to think about as you're honing in your systems. On the left here, there's just an example of the difference in plant health and maturity based on cell size. These were all seeded at the same time, but you can see the plants in the foreground that have bigger cells are just like way further along in maturity. They're healthier, they're more robust, and that's a trade-off. Yeah, that you know, just being aware of that when you're choosing seeding dates and transplant dates, that the smaller the cell, the less mature the plant is going to be, and obviously the less time you should have it in the cell. And then on the right is some examples of in the greenhouse versus under grow lights in a basement. And there's a clear example of that coming up next, but I find that really fascinating to think about. So here's some basil that is in the greenhouse versus under grow lights. And in the background, the much more mature basil was under grow lights in a basement, and in the foreground was in a greenhouse. Seeded the same date, but it's just like so much further along from being under grow lights. And so that's really just to say, maybe just as an encouragement, that growing in a greenhouse is hard, even though they're amazing resources and amazing pieces of infrastructure. So many variables going on, and you know, this was May in Vermont. There's cold nights. You can see that there's some algae formation. You know, there's just so many variables to work through, and it's, even though it's a controlled environment, it's less controlled than other environments, like in a basement with grow lights. So just a word of encouragement that it takes time to dial in your systems well. Right, and now I'll move into, let's see what time it is. All right, perfect, just about 3 o'clock. I will move into some crop specific discussion around those 3: lettuce, carrots, and beets. And I'm hoping that then from there we can move into some group conversations specific to those crops, or more generally, or about other crops that you have trouble with. So first, the #1 crop that I hear about from growers just having major challenges with germination in the field are carrots. And there are many factors going into this. I mean, just, you know, at a sort of base level, carrots are a tough crop to germinate. They take a long time to germinate, and, you know, obviously they do best direct seeded. And so you're dealing with a slow germinating direct seeded crop. There's lots of variables involved in that. And then specifically right now, in the last couple of years, and there's no end to the issue in sight, is this issue of the lygus bug affecting organic carrot seed production. And the lygus bug is a pest that creates invisible damage to the seed head. It, you know, as the seed is really nearing maturity, it will penetrate the hull of the carrot seed, the individual seed, and eat the embryo inside the seed. And there will be no visible difference in the seed head itself. The damage is only discoverable upon germination testing. And this bug has really ravaged organic seed production. There are no known mitigation strategies for it. Right now, there are pesticides and conventional systems that can treat crops for it, but not in organic seed production. So as a result, we've seen decreasing germination rates in carrot seed lots in the last few years. You may have noticed this if you've been struggling with carrots, that we've at High Mowing had to lower our threshold for acceptable germination rate in carrots to 70%. And we are often, almost always now, dealing with carrot seed lots that are in the 70 to 80% germination rate, sometimes over that. And if it's over that, if it's over 80, we're happy about it. But it certainly compounds the struggles with carrot seed germination that already existed based just on the bare facts of the situation. And as a result of that, also, there's less organic pelleted carrot seed available because pelleting has the potential to reduce germination just a little bit more. Inevitably, some seeds get damaged in the process of coating them with clay. And so this year, High Mowing has no pelleted carrot seed available because we just couldn't stomach further decreasing the germination rate at all with the pelleting process. Besides that start to the situation, there's all of the other factors at play. So bed prep is particularly important in carrots. You really want to start with as a weed seed free bed as possible. So stale bedding is really common in carrot production, either with tarping methods where you provoke the weed seeds that are near the surface to germinate under a tarp, and then inevitably, because they can't access light, they will die. And so you kind of create a flush of weed germination before planting your main crop. Or you can also kill off those weed, provoke germination without a tarp with maybe watering, and then go through and flame weed the seeds that have germinated and then go in and plant your carrots. So many different stale bedding methods. I think tarping is becoming more and more popular over the flame weeder. And then thinking about certainly your irrigation and how you're getting even moisture to the whole bed throughout that really long germination phase, especially, that carrots are taking 2 weeks plus to germinate, making sure that they have adequate moisture throughout that time. And then moving down to seeding depth and stand density, there's this question of seeding really heavily and then moving through and thinning, which you can do if you're at a certain small scale, or you can, seed hoping to get the stand density that you really want to carry through to maturity. And in some ways, like, it's a little bit of a running joke amongst me and my coworkers. In some ways, the decreased germination rate due to the lygus bug can work in your favor in that way. There's kind of a built-in amount of dead seed in the seed that you're sowing, which can help you have a less dense stand and need to thin less. That said, if you do decide that you want to compensate for the missing, that 30%, 25-30% germination that you're not going to get from the seed that you're planting, you can overseed and seed a little bit heavier than you would if that lot were closer to 100% germination. But you don't really want to end up overcompensating. And, so if you have a carrot lot that is germinating at 75%, I wouldn't suggest increasing your seeding by a full 25%, but maybe more like a 10 to 15%, because you can end up in a situation where you have way too dense of a stand. And then, know your soil, know what it needs for successful carrot production. I know some people really increase the organic matter that they're adding to a bed, especially if they're working in a permanent bed system when they're going to put carrots in, even more so if they have a more clay soil, really upping the amount of compost that goes onto a bed before seeding carrots in particular, and things like that, just adjusting your soil to meet the needs of a more finicky crop like carrots. Next, let's talk about lettuce, and this is much more focused on transplants than on direct seeded lettuce. And really, what you're striving for when you're growing transplants is consistency. You want all of the cells to germinate, and you want them to germinate all at the same time. Challenges to that can be uneven watering of the individual trays or tray to tray. And then also seed dislocation. If you're watering too heavily or you seed it into really dry, fluffy potting mix, and then you water, that seed can move really easily deeper into the soil and have trouble emerging. And then if you're using pelleted seed, there's so many variables at play, and I hear so many stories of success, struggle, everything in between with pelleted lettuce seed. But just some information that might be helpful is that there are two types of pelleting material. One is they're both clays, but one is designed to melt, and I think that's a little bit more intuitive for what people think is happening to pelleted seed once it's seeded. Is that just as it soaks in water, it's dissolving, and that clay coating is dissolving over the course of a couple of days, and then the seed is emerging from that. There's also a cracking type in which the clay absorbs water until it cracks open, and then the seed has a chance to germinate and emerge. And so they can, from what I've understood from growers, the cracking type are a little bit less forgiving. And I think just anecdotally what is happening is that if there's any break in moisture in the days before emergence, that pellet is absorbing water, and then there's nothing to absorb, and it kind of like solidifies even more and kind of crusts over. And after that, if it does have access to moisture after that, it still doesn't really, like, it doesn't pick up where it left off and just keep absorbing and then crack. It seems like it just doesn't crack if it dried out too much at any point in that process. So the biggest key with pelleted seed is that you really have to maintain moisture until emergence. So I always recommend thinking about your daily patterns or your crew's daily patterns and keeping seeds with pelleted trays in them, like at the front of the greenhouse along the aisle, where if they are drying out at all, you're the most likely to see them and most likely to just, grab a hose and soak them, even if it's not part of your daily watering regime. And let's see, and then one other thing about pelleted seed is that it does have a shorter shelf life. You really shouldn't try to use pelleted seed from the previous season, because it just, the pelleting itself reduces that seed's shelf life. And then thermodormancy is another big factor in lettuce germination. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So I think I'll just wait until then because there's nice examples of it in action. But yeah, just going back to that, thinking about watering and thinking about your daily habits, also thinking about the fitting that's on the end of your hose. Is it dropping too big of droplets onto your trays so you're contributing to seed dislocation? And then also jumping down to that last one, thinking about cell size and the rate of drying out. The smaller the cell, the faster it's going to dry out. And depending on even the design of your tray, if there's more airflow from the bottom, those cells are going to dry out faster. So one size definitely doesn't fit all in terms of frequency of watering and what your trays are going to need. So yeah, these are some of the things that we hear about, and this is where I'll focus on thermodormancy. It's definitely common as things heat up in the summer or spring into summer, or after a burst of unexpected heat, that myself and my coworkers will get a flush of calls about failures in lettuce germination. And a lot of times it seems like that can be attributed to thermodormancy. So lettuce seed is very sensitive to temperature and can be compromised, not by like dying, but by going dormant at temperatures anything above 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And it can be for a really short amount of time, even if it just spends like a couple of hours in temperatures higher than that. The seed can go dormant. You can, if you know that the seed sat at too high of temperatures, before you put it in the trays, if maybe it sat at the end of your driveway in a box on a really hot day, or you put it in your car and ran errands and then realized, oh my gosh, it really got hot in the car while the seed was in there, you can break that dormancy by putting it in a freezer for a couple of days. And yeah, kind of waking it up again, letting it know that it's okay to germinate. Then yeah, you can mitigate it. If though you've already seeded the trays and then they dry out and sit in temperatures higher than that and the soil's getting above 77 degrees, you can run into issues with them going dormant after seeding. So just, yeah, doing whatever you can to keep the soil cool and the ambient temperature cool can really help with your results in your lettuce transplants. Oh, and what's the last little bit? Yeah, and it's, yeah, just another way that dormancy can happen is if it's in the tray and actively absorbing water and then the temperatures spike before termination. Here's an example of thermodormancy in action, which is pretty neat and interesting. So there was this shaded house next to a bunch of trays seeded with lettuce, and the cells closest to the shaded house likely because there was cooler air coming from under the shade cloth. So it's definitely a real phenomenon. The last one is beets, and they're even more variable in terms of experiences that growers have, challenges that they have. So I think it's even more case specific than carrots and lettuce. But some factors at play are the seed size variance within beets. So I think most growers in California are direct seeding beets. It's more common in the Northeast and other parts of the country that have cooler springs to grow beets from transplant because they do like a warmer soil for germination, like at least 70-degree soil temp for germination. So yeah, on the East Coast, we do a lot of transplanting, especially of the first couple of successions of beets. But for direct seeding purposes, which I think a lot of growers here are doing, you should be thinking about the variance in seed size. Some varieties of seed and some lots of beet seed are precision sized, meaning that they have been sorted to be more similar in size to each other than not. But that is not always the case, especially for some open pollinated varieties and less like commercial varieties. They may not be precision sized. And so you're going to get a wide range in seed size, which if you're using a seeder will impact your density because the seeds will like self-sort by size in the hopper. So you can end up with, your first section really dense and then the latter sections with bigger seed, less dense. And another piece I'll just jump down to the cork, so that decorticated seed morphology. So beet seed is decorticated. Beet seed is basically a seed within what we see when we have beet seeds in our hands. There's like a hull around it, and there's also cork. Where that comes into play is in one way, it that cork can be host to a lot more pathogens than a more like naked seed might be. So yeah, there's just often more seed-borne disease issues with seed because it's playing host to the pathogens themselves. And so if you're seeing things like damping off or other, fishy things in the field post-germination, you might think about that and making sure that your seed has been tested for pathogens. Yeah, and I think I will probably leave beets at that because I think there's so many variabilities, also just in terms of soil, beets are a bit picky. They like more acidic soils, but not too acidic. And they do struggle with too much nutrition, like too much nitrogen, for example, can lead to trouble with beets, and they definitely need boron and phosphorus in adequate amounts, and potassium in adequate amounts to size up well and not end up with scab or black heart. Yeah, so those are some things about beets, and perfect. We have a half hour left. I'll just move through. Yeah, I think we don't need to focus too much on beets for transplant here unless folks want to. A lot of people back east especially are doing beets in a paper pot transplanter, which I love doing. I think it can be a really great way to get beets in the ground in the early season in a pretty efficient way. And that's it for me talking at you, part of the presentation. This is my information. Always feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat more in depth about these things on a one-on-one basis, and like share things I'm hearing from other growers and just be a conduit in that way. And I also wanted to end on a very not comprehensive list of seed resources. So the first three up here are just some people doing awesome work in the world of seeds, organic seeds, indigenous seeds, seed sovereignty work. So I really am grateful for all of the folks at these three different organizations, and there are many others as well, but I recommend checking each of them out. And then these are some seed companies also that I love, and I'm so glad that we have them as resources and for the work that they do. I'd love to hear from you all what seed companies or seed growers or seed resources that you love and would like to share. Yeah, so that's where I'll stop. I'll pause, and I would love to hear from you all, hear some questions and stuff.
All right, we got a question here about tips for even spinach germination for transplants. Or actually, someone also asked any tips for direct sowing spinach. They are so sensitive. So folks got some spinach questions.
Totally. Oh, I should have known this, that people were going to talk about spinach. I mean, similar to beets, they're really temperature sensitive. So it's a tricky one because, you know, spinach as a plant does really well in cool temperatures, but it doesn't love to germinate in cool soil temperatures, which is also, you know, both of those factors are similar to beets. So yeah, I typically grow spinach from transplant for that reason, in part, that it's easier to germinate them in cells in more controlled conditions and warmer conditions, and then transplant them out to the field or to the winter tunnel or wherever you're growing spinach. So that's one thing. Otherwise, I still honestly, there's some mystery to me. I've had folks say that they've gotten, you know, like 2 out of 128 cells germinate with spinach that on our end tested great, you know, looks great. So there's still some mystery there for me about why it can be so hit or miss, especially like in a controlled environment. Yeah, I would love to hear from other people. If you are an amazing spinach grower who has no problems with spinach germination, it'd be really fun to hear what you're doing. Because yeah, I definitely hear really mixed results. Sorry, that's not the greatest answer, but if anybody has more to say about it, put stack in the chat and I would love to hear from you.
If folks have questions, yeah, just we got somebody. I've also found that spinach doesn't germinate well in high temperatures.
Yeah, definitely right. It's like a sweet spot of not too cold, definitely not too high. I mean, it'll cook for sure, and that's the case for a lot of things. I mean, solanaceous varieties will be happier with a warmer soil temp, obviously, and people are using heat mats for them most of the time. But I would not recommend really using a heat mat with spinach unless you have a really cold house that you're trying to do it in. Spinach germ temp, if I'm not mistaken, sorry, I'm just seeing that question in the chat. Ideal spinach germ temp, I think, is 65 to 75 degrees. Don't quote me on that.
We got somebody here saying they can grow spinach at 8,500 feet above sea level, and it bolts at sea level in the outdoors. So elevation seems also a variable to consider.
Yeah, definitely. And it is hard to find organic spinach varieties that are well suited to growing in warmer climates. The variety that we have that I recommend for that right now is Renegade. Seems to do the best in terms of bolt resistance and warmer temperatures. But we're hoping to have some more options in the future for heat resistant spinach.
Any other seed questions, burning seed questions? Drop it in the chats.
See, I'm just looking through. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I guess I can go on a little tangent quickly and maybe it'll generate more questions. But I personally am really excited about the possibilities for more regional seed production. And I think there are some amazing people working on that in California. And I think it's a huge element of resilience in our food system to really be more in control of our local seed supplies. So I encourage anybody who's interested in like integrating seed production into your farm plan, or even if you're like a gardener kind of looking into community level seed production possibilities. And I know like part of the Small Farms Conference is an event focused on integrating seed production into your farm. I think that's in Sacramento in a couple of days. And another piece of that is that like seed cleaning equipment that can be a real limiting factor for people producing seed at scale. And so I'm just excited to see, I don't have any answers quite yet, but I'm excited to see what happens in the next decade plus around community-based seed cleaning and seed processing equipment. And yeah, I know there's people who know a lot more about that than me working on it on a daily basis, but I'm just really excited to see what we can all do when we work together on that.
We have a question here. How do you determine when to plant lettuce transplants outside? Is it a specific number of days after germination, once it reaches a specific height, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of all of those factors. You definitely don't want to plant before the last frost date unless you're going to cover it. But besides that, I would say in terms of specific number of days after germinating, it really depends on your cell size. If you're using really tiny cells, you're going to have to plant those out younger so that they don't end up root bound and kind of stalling. But if you're working with bigger cells, then you can let them get pretty big before transplanting them out. And it's basically more than a specific size or time after seeding. It's much more about making sure that they don't get to a level of maturity that they're starved for nutrition and space in the cell. Yeah, if that makes sense.
So we had a couple of shout outs in the chat. Well, I guess my question is, what about like the temperature fluctuations in seed germination? Can you speak a little bit about that? I think that especially on a small farm, you have maybe less uniformity of the sun, and you've got like smaller, tighter spaces where, like you mentioned before, there was that, next to that shade cloth, where that cool air was coming in terms of if you're on a small space and you're wondering about what side of the barn or the shed to be putting the seeds on, does that play a role?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think thinking about your particular space and factors in that way can be part of that, like thinking of the whole seed system kind of framework of mind. And I think, yeah, thinking about that, thinking of like spaces, fixed spaces on your farm that are just going to be warmer because they're south facing or along the south side of a building that's radiating heat. And maybe you don't try to, direct seed your spinach there or anything that's going to really fry. And maybe you only do transplanted crops in that section that's that is consistently hotter and maybe drier or just more at risk of drying out and heating up throughout the day. And yeah, maybe you only transplant crops that have had a good healthy start already out there. But I think also just the temperature mitigating power of water can be a huge resource. Hopefully if you have access to water, which not everyone does, but that, both in the greenhouse and in the fields, I think water can be a really good friend when dealing with temperature fluctuations in the space or throughout the day. Yeah, what else about that? I guess also, maybe not with direct seeded crops, but mulching can be a really great way of evening out inconsistent temperature, at least soil temperature. So keeping it warm when it's cold out or keeping it cooler when it's really baking out. Using straw on your beds or another form of mulch can be helpful for that.
Mm-hmm. We got a question here. Is it better to sow in cells versus flats? And that looks like they're specifically talking about lettuce.
So I use those two words kind of interchangeably. If I'm referring to a flat, I'm usually talking about a flat like that's divided into cells, but maybe what you're asking is more cells versus what I call open flats, like where it's you just fill it with dirt. And for lettuce, I would definitely say in cells. I would use open flats for anything that is not too delicate to be kind of separated and potted up. So like onions, a lot of flowers, tomatoes, things that are okay to be kind of handled and detangled and potted up. Lettuce, I would not put in that category. First of all, I wouldn't want to be dealing with potting up lettuce because that's a lot of labor going into a short turnaround crop if you're going to be potting it up and then also planting it out into the field. So I wouldn't want to do that, but also it wouldn't respond very well and it would kind of get tangled in the open flat and then you'd have to detangle it and it would get kind of beat up. So I would definitely go with cells for that. And I think you can have success with a really wide range of cell sizes for lettuce. Plenty of people are doing lettuce and really tiny, even smaller than 128 cells, and just you got to transplant it out really quickly in that kind of system, or you can give it more time in the greenhouse by planting in larger cells up to like that 72 size.
Another question specifically about high mowing seeds, and they're wondering where does the seed come from? Where does the georegion of most of the seeds come from? Yeah,
there is no most. It's a totally diverse and mixed origins or like origin stories amongst all of our varieties. So yeah, some people sometimes think that our seed is majority grown in the Northeast, and that is not true at all. The Northeast is not a great seed production region. It works for like wet seeded crops like cucurbits, winter squashes, cucumbers, summer squashes. We do some of that seed production in Vermont, but it is really not great for dry seeded crops like lettuce or anything that's producing seed via a flower because it's such a moist place with a really short season. So our seed, a lot of it is grown in the Pacific Northwest, both if it's coming from other seed companies or coming from directly from a grower. The Pacific Northwest is just like the prime seed production region in this country and one of the best in the world. So a lot of it comes from there. Also a fair amount of our dry seeded crops come from Southern California, like mustards, other brassicas come from Southern California. Potatoes in large part from the kind of central west, like inland west. And yeah, there's some Midwest producers, but it's more concentrated on the West Coast for sure. And then some of our brassica seeds, if they're from a company called Bejo, which most of the time we note in our catalog if a varieties from Bejo, that seed could be grown in Europe. Bejo has production both in Europe and the US. So some of our brassicas and some of our carrot seed comes from Europe. Thanks. I'm glad it was enlightening. I think it's fast. I've learned a lot. I was farming for 8 years and then went to grad school, and now working in the seed industry, I've had the same realization. There's so much to learn, and I think it's taught me a lot about questions of resilience and sustainability.
Do we have any other questions from the audience here?
Any seed growers or seed savers in the audience? I'm gonna stop my share. Awesome.
We've got a couple of seed savers on a very small scale.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if everyone saw in my last slide. I just saw that there's a seed production 101 course happening on Friday, an online course for $15, which I'm hoping to make it to. So recommend that. Awesome. Cool.
Now, do you think there's, in terms of, I guess in terms of an industry, do you feel like if someone here was interested in getting into commercial seed production, even on a small scale, where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth? Do you see, like, are you noticing trends? Are you noticing maybe gaps in the market where folks are like, man, you know, if I could only find more of these, is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a complex question. So yes, there are definitely, I mean, specific to organic production, there are so many varieties that people rely on that are only available conventionally. And Mowing and other seed companies that are focused on organic seed, it's definitely part of our responsibility to, like, every year decide which of those we can commit to you know, stewarding an organic production of and bringing it into organic availability. So that's kind of one layer of our work, and definitely that depends oftentimes, almost all the time, on contract growers and their availability to grow that crop in that season, or maybe we have to wait a couple of years. So definitely, like, we are trying all the time to connect with more contract growers, and all, you know, not only because of, you know, needing a wide range of varieties to be grown every year, but also we more and more are trying to mitigate the impact of climate change on seed productions by having multiple productions of any single variety in any given year. So, you know, and diversifying them across different geographies, you know, so having a production in Southern California, a production up in Washington. So if one of them goes awry, we still have some seed supply. And in terms of how to break into it, if you're new and looking to grow seed on a contract basis, I think it's a lot about scale. And there are definitely crop types that we have that there are much smaller contracts available. So like flowers can be a nice place to step into selling seeds to a seed company, because they're often, just for us at least, that we're not as focused on flowers as vegetable varieties. Our contracts are often a lot smaller and better suited to a smaller grower. And then I would say also there's like many seed companies that are looking for contract growers, and we all are different sizes. So maybe high mowings need is too big for what you can do when you're just starting out, but True Love or one of the other seed companies can take a smaller amount of seed and that's going to work for them. So I think it's both thinking about the crop type that makes the most sense for your system and your scale, and also the seed company partners that make the most sense for your systems and scale. Yeah, and then some of that equipment piece too, and thinking regionally, if maybe you know someone, you know, that's within an hour drive or something that has the seed cleaning equipment that you could use to process your seed. That's complicated, especially with organic seed. But yeah, those are some factors that I would think about, and some places that I think there's room for growth.
Cool. And someone asked about the specific details for the class on Friday, and it looks like somebody else in the chat followed up on that. So it looks like there's a link in there for anybody who wants to dig even deeper into seeds. You can check that link out. One more question that came up was someone said, some of my favorite market varieties are hybrids. I can't really save these, can I? That's the question?
Yeah, I love that question. So the answer is you can save them, as long as they're not patented and you're gonna try to sell them. But most of that, like the grand majority of hybrids that we sell, are not patented, and you would be fine, like legally, to sell them for that version of Can I. And then in terms of what you would get, you basically, when you save the seeds from a hybrid, you can get any expression of the genetics from the two parent lines. And so it is very unlikely that you will get the same expression of those genetics that you got when you planted the seed that you bought. Because what a hybrid is the first generation of two parent lines, the offspring of two parent lines. And so the genetics are really unstable compared to an open pollinated variety that's been saved for decades or centuries, and those genetics have really stabilized. The genetics in a hybrid are really young and really unstable, and so you can get in that seed that you save, you will have a wide variety of genetics from the parent lines, and it's a grab bag of what you're going to get when you use that seed the next year. That said, if you have the space and time and ability and flexibility to get a surprise, it can be really fun. And you can end up with something that you love, and then you can steward and save that and get it to a place of more genetic stability. So I don't know if folks know Frank Morton, who's a well-known seed saver and plant breeder, and he's a big proponent of dehybridizing seed, saving seed from hybrids, and coming up with new expressions of those genetics. Yeah, so I encourage it. I think it can be fun, but don't expect a predictable product.
Gotcha. Well, last chance here for folks who want to ask any more questions, but
I did see one more question about any tips for buying seed to use for multiple seasons and which seeds last longest, which I think is a great question because of especially the environment that we're in right now, where seed supplies are volatile and there has been scarcity in the last couple of years. So I'll say it kind of in reverse. The ones that I wouldn't recommend trying to save for more than like 2 seasons are alliums, onions, leeks, etc. They don't have the best shelf life, but outside of that, many seeds will do just fine for stored for multiple seasons. It's kind of what they're designed to do naturally, to wait and hold steady until they have the perfect conditions for germination. So I would definitely encourage you to, dial in your storage systems, make sure they're stored in nice, cool, dry conditions, and then you can save things for many years. I mean, some that I frequently save for many years are tomatoes and cucurbits, and they do fine. I still have tomato seed from 8 years ago that I'm using, and it germinates just fine.
And if you get lucky, you might be able to germinate a 2,000-year-old date.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, I think that's the record.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. So check it out. You never know. You never know. You could bring back history. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for bringing your knowledge and wisdom. And please reach out if you have questions. Check out that workshop on Friday. Sarah is always a great resource for this stuff. And check out High Mowing Seeds. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Lots more workshops yet to come. Jam-packed day tomorrow, and regional gatherings in person on Thursday. We might be dancing in the rain, folks. So if you want rain, plan an event. Anyway, thank you guys so much, and we will see you soon.
Thank you all.